This week, my guest is Dr. Stephen Gundry. He's a cardiac surgeon, medical innovator, and author of books like The Plant Paradox, The Plant Paradox Cookbook, and others. But he has over 30 years' experience as one of the world's preeminent experts in heart surgery. He was head of cardiothoracic surgery at Loma Linda University. He left there in 2002 to found the Center for Restorative Medicine, studying the human microbiome, developing the principles of Holobiotics. They've changed many people's lives since then, and he's going to share with us today. Listen in and enjoy. Well, welcome to You Elevated, Dr. Gundry. It is good to see you today.
Good to be back.
It's look, so since I last saw you, first off, I just want to remind everybody, Plant Paradox, this is the book, and I don't know if I've told you this enough yet, has changed my life and my family's life.
I apologize.
This in the best possible way. So it's mind-blowing. We're going to get into the detail of that, but your new book is out as well, the Plant Paradox Cookbook, the companion to the Plant Paradox. But I want to start with this, and I think this is an important part of the conversation. Anytime we talk about wellness and we talk about health, and I know we're going to get into some other details here, how do you start your day?
Well, I get up and I have 4 dogs that stare at me, and I have a large black cup of coffee, and then they continue to stare at me, and then I take them for about a 2.5-mile hike in the hills above my house.
So do you eat anything? Or you just have the black coffee?
Just the black coffee.
Do you do any kind of like a mental exercise, spiritual exercise, prayer, anything like that to start your day?
Yeah, actually, I watch what dogs do for 2.5 miles, and that's actually my mental exercise.
So it's a very calming, and you're connecting, you're communing with nature.
Yeah, exactly. And I have 3 girl dogs and 1 boy dog, and I don't know, and I have 2 daughters and a wife, and so I connect with nature by watching my boy dog decide which bush and tree he wants to hit.
I love it. It's a great way. So, but again, so you're starting with some black coffee. You're getting out into nature.
Every day, whether I want to or not.
Right, kind of sets a tone. And I think that's really important that we set a tone for the day, because sometimes when we're used to eating, bags of potato chips and tons of French fries, and we love eating our pasta with tomato sauce, all the things that are like anti-Plant Paradox, right? To start changing that mindset, we have to start somewhere, because just saying, don't eat this food, that's not the way we change our lives.
Correct. Years ago, my wife loves bread, just absolutely loves it. A French baguette just, drives her into seventh heaven.
Yes.
And so she was really trying to break this habit, and I actually blogged about it years ago. And so she hated the fact that she couldn't have bread. She knew she shouldn't have bread. And so I said, why don't we make this affirmative and just, you are a person who doesn't eat bread. And she just started that mantra. She said, I am a person who doesn't eat bread. So it actually became a affirmative thing, and that's how she got kind of used to not having bread.
Because that's what I think is the common misconception. When we talk about positively impacting your health, which is what the Plant Paradox does.
Correct.
And we're going to get into those details in just another moment. It's important to know that unlike what we've heard through our whole lives, can't. That's the whole point of the Plant Paradox Cookbook is you can. It's delicious. It's fulfilling. It's satisfying. You're not missing anything. This is a marvelous way to live. And you feel better once you get over that initial step 1 of the Plant Paradox.
That's right.
So let's talk about this for a second. It's highly, I think, as I read on the internet, some people consider what you wrote in the Plant Paradox to be highly controversial. What is the great controversy?
I don't quite get the great controversy. Some people actually read, or who have never read the book, accuse me of being a paleo spokesperson who all I want people to do is eat meat and cheese. And I'm going,
try reading the book.
Yeah, try reading the book. I said, believe it or not, I'm very pro-plant. I just want you to know who your friends are in the plant kingdom and who probably means you harm.
Right.
And we do disagree as to the benefit of whole grains with a few people and the place that beans have in a diet. But we have to realize that the idea that whole grains are healthy actually began with William Harvey Kellogg at Battle Creek, Michigan, a Seventh-day Adventist institution that they couldn't get their sanitarium patients to eat grains, whole grains, because quite frankly, they don't taste very good. So they tricked them by grinding them up into a fine powder or wetting them down. And, of course, Kellogg's Corn Flakes was the result. And what happens, and this was actually described to me a few years ago by Stefan Lindberg, who wrote one of the most amazing books that I recommend to everybody called Food and Western Disease. And he had no dog in this fight. And he basically said that lectin-containing foods are a negative aspect, like grains and beans, of the Mediterranean diet that are compensated for by all the positive aspects, like all the polyphenol-rich fruits and vegetables, the massive amounts of olive oil, the fish, and the red wine. And he said, but you can actually do studies, which have been done, and some are mentioned in the Plant Paradox, that the grains and the beans are not the beneficial part. They're the bad part that are overshadowed.
Oh, interesting. So that's one of the things that was so difficult for me initially with the Plant Paradox is I loved beans, or so I thought. And interestingly enough, before you and I first met and I first read the Plant Paradox, I interviewed you actually over the telephone first before I first met, and then you came into the studio and I interviewed you. But a few months before I met you, I had done something, an IgG food sensitivity test. Mm-hmm. And my whole life, and this ties into what you talk about and in the Plant Paradox, I had always hated cashews. Hated them. I mean, and I married into a family, my wife's wonderful family. A lot of them are vegan. So almost everything is cashew based. And I would go visit her family and I was like, I would feel bloated. I would be having to go to the bathroom, just be polite about it. I was using the bathroom differently because there was all these cashew food. And I took an IgG food sensitivity test and I had a high reactivity to cashews. And I had a moderate reactivity to peanuts and green peas. Yeah. Is what this food sensitivity test showed. And I'm curious, like an IgG test. So when we get into what lectins exactly are for a second, so I had already started eliminating some of these things before I met you. And that started making a difference in cutting out sugar. But let's get into a little detail again. What is a lectin? Because it sounds like something I would want to eat. It sounds like pectin or something delicious and sweet, but it's not.
No. So a lectin is a protein that sometimes called a sticky protein that plants use as a major part of their defense system against being eaten. And plants, believe it or not, aren't here for us. They're here for them. Right. And their babies, their seeds. Because plants don't have defense mechanisms like we do of fighting or running, they use chemical warfare. And one of their best chemical warfares is lectins. And lectins are designed to make an animal ill or to feel bad or to not thrive. And if an animal feels bad or isn't thriving when eating a particular food, a particular plant, the smart animal, like you and cashews, figure out, this is some plant baby that I probably shouldn't be eating because every time I eat it, I don't feel good.
Right. And it doesn't even taste good because of I'm assuming some biological response that's trying to tell me stop eating this. It doesn't even taste good to you.
Well, you might be interested. There's a paper from in the 1960s looking at the tomato lectin, which is in the peel and the seeds. And this paper showed that eating a sliced tomato, all of the sugar molecule lectin receptors in your mouth are completely saturated by tomato lectins within just a few bites.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But that's why, so in the Plant Paradox, so like at my house now, my wife, when we make something with pasta, the capellos that you talk about in the book, which we've gotten really into, she peels and de-seeds tomatoes. Yeah. And so we can still have tomatoes.
Absolutely.
You just have to avoid the parts that the plant has made as a natural defense against us eating them.
Yeah. And in fact, in the Plant Paradox Cookbook, one of the things that's important to realize is for the most part, you can use a pressure cooker like, the Instant Pot or any of the other modern ones, and you can destroy almost all lectins with pressure cooking. So if you want to put a whole can of tomatoes in, you can absolutely destroy it and make tomato sauce safely.
So when we eat these lectins, I want to go back to something because I think this is really important. When we eat these lectins, our body, it wants to bind to sugars, as I believe is how you describe that, molecules in our body. So that's in our intestines, that's in our bloodstream, that's in our joints,
in our brain, in our blood vessels.
Wow. Okay. And it's things like the nightshades, the New World foods, I think is how it's, but it's also things like all of the grains. You were talking about the whole grains seem to be a problem. But the one I think that surprises people the most, and oddly enough, I actually knew this before I met you because I had interviewed the guy that wrote the book, The Devil in the Milk.
Ah, yeah.
Professor Keith Woodford.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had heard about it, is that dairy can be such a big problem as well. Tell me about that.
So that's an amazing book for anybody who wants to read it, and he was absolutely ahead of his time. He was in New Zealand, and obviously an incredibly pristine country, and all their cows are grass-fed, and they have a very high rate of type 1 diabetes, juvenile diabetes in the old word, and he didn't get it. And he says, this is really weird. Why would we in this pristine environment have this? So he took it upon himself to look at the breeds of cows around the world, and he discovered that, in fact, there's essentially two sorts of cows, one that make the traditional protein in milk called casein, A2, and the mutant cow that has now occupied most of the world that makes casein A1. And that's the Holstein cow, the black and white cow. Excuse me. So he started mapping out the incidence of type 1 diabetes around the world, and he found an incredibly strong correlation between the type of cow and the incidence of type 1 diabetes. The type A, casein A1 cows, wherever those were located, there was a big incidence of type 1 diabetes. And he made the correlation. Now, correlation is not causation.
Right.
I will be the first to say that. But he was shocked of this much of a correlation. Subsequently, we know that casein A1 is a lectin-like compound that's made into beta-casein morphine, which can prompt an autoimmune attack on the beta cell of the pancreas that makes insulin.
Right.
And I recently talked to a gentleman from China, and there's a Chinese study that's being completed now comparing the groups that use A1 versus A2, and they're finding the same things, that the A1 cow milk populations that exist get type 1 diabetes and the A2s
at a much higher rate.
Yeah, at a much higher rate.
Yeah, because I know, like at my house now, based on the Plant Paradox, we buy water buffalo butter, for example, that I like to put in my coffee. I make a bulletproof style coffee in the morning, and I use the water buffalo from Italy, that butter that you recommend. And it's interesting. The other thing, I just have to gush about this for a second. One of the greatest things that happened in my family with the change, not just some of the amazing medical things that have happened by following the Plant Paradox, once we started following it, is look at how many great cheeses there are in the world that I didn't even know about until I was told by you that, hey, look, the Southern European cows are more of the A2, or water buffalo, sheep, goat, all this stuff. It's great. That's the A2 protein milk, is sheep, goat, water buffalo, and some cows, which are found in like Southern Europe and some in the Southern Hemisphere. And now we have an A2 brand milk around here, but the cheeses are amazing.
Yeah, no, they're great. And in my upcoming book, The Longevity Paradox, you're going to find out.
When is this coming?
It's going to be April of 2019.
Okay.
So it's coming.
Cool.
You're going to find out that aged cheeses have some incredibly interesting compounds that probably will extend your life. Ooh.
Oh, wow. I love to hear that.
Yeah.
So you're taking kind of the blue zone concept to the whole next level, combining in what you're doing and your research has found.
Right.
I love that. And I think that's really important, because what we want, at least for me, so I have a goal of living to at least 110 is what I keep joking. I mean, people think I'm joking, but I'm not.
No.
And people are always like, why do you want to live to be 110? Because my goal is not to be 110 frail, old, non-functioning. My goal is to be 110 and clear-minded and strong and still functional.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's why this book is called The Longevity Paradox, because what we want to do, and the subtitle is How to Die Young at a Ripe Old Age.
There you go.
And that's what we want. But most people only see horrible things with getting old. And what you're going to learn in that book is a reflection of the plant paradox. Most of the things that make people old are the things they think are healthy for them.
Oh, wow. I want to take us in a little bit of a different direction because there are some specific things. And again, you got to get the Plant Paradox. We have the links up. Click it right now. You can get a copy of the book. Need this? You don't need this one, but really you ought to read it because you're going to want to know everything that's inside of it. And then, of course, the Plant Paradox Cookbook because you want to eat the delicious foods. He gives you lots, 100 easy-to-use recipes. You don't have to come up with all your own. It's right here. And there's really great background, too, if you don't want to read the whole Plant Paradox.
Exactly.
There's a great background in here as well. But one of the things that I'm really curious about is, like I said, I did that immune sensitivity test on myself. I experiment. So I wear a blood, continuous glucose monitor. I want to see what my body does. I want to feel what my body feels. I cut sugar out. I do all these things. I come up with my recipes, too. What about the idea of immunity? Can't we build up an immunity to lectins? How have humans survived eating these grains for 5,000 years?
Well, we've survived, but we haven't thrived eating those. We actually have shrunk about a foot when we started eating grains and beans 10,000 years ago. And our brain size has actually never recovered. Our brains used to be 15% bigger than they are today.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, our brains have shrunk dramatically. And remember, this was my research at Yale in human evolution. One of the striking things is the shrinkage of our brain since agriculture revolution occurred.
That's amazing. I had no idea. So our brains are smaller.
Yeah, our brains are smaller. And one of the interesting things that most people are maybe aware of, but they didn't know why, up until the last generation, most of us were taught and assumed that Asians, as a general rule, were much shorter than Africans or Caucasians. And then in the last generation, they've shot up and caught up with everybody else, sometimes even surpassed us. So what's happened is that was a very, very, very heavy lectin diet. Lots of pulses, lots of beans, lots of rice, and they've westernized, unfortunately, but in westernizing, they've removed a lot of those plant compounds that was actually keeping them short. Now, as you'll learn in the longevity paradox, shortness is an incredibly good thing. The shorter you are, the longer you're going to live. So all your short listeners out there, and my mother was 5 foot, and my daughter who's 5'2". Short is good for long life, and we can talk about that later.
Well, we'll get to that next April. We'll come back and visit, please.
Exactly.
So this idea of immunity to lectins, that just really, but what about like the Mesoamericans? They're the ones who ate these New World foods for 20,000 years.
That's true, but interestingly enough, they had developed techniques to detoxify lectins. The Incas had 3 detoxification processes to get the lectins out of quinoa so it wouldn't kill them. They soaked it, and then they fermented it. They let it rot, and then they cooked it. And it's not on the package directions.
Nobody says let it rot.
Right. The Indians, Southwest American Indians and the Mexican Indians, always treated corn, maize with lye to actually break down the lectins, but also so that they destroyed the niacin binding property that's in corn. What the explorers from the New World didn't know when they brought corn back is that the Indians had actually figured out how to detoxify it.
So we started eating it in its toxic form.
Exactly. And so corn became the staple of northern Italy around Milan and Polenta. And what happened was in the late 19th century, there was a huge epidemic of congenital mental retardation. They were called cretins, that from their corn eating, and they literally were born with very small brains. the French, whose border is on Italy, were so impressed with the dangers of corn that in 1900, the French government banned corn as unfit for human consumption. Banned corn. That's why you go to France even now and you rarely see corn on menus.
That's interesting. Yeah, instead we get great baguettes and cheese.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
wine and
but we get white
fish.
baguettes.
Yes, that's right. It is.
And white croissants. I mean, the idea really of a whole wheat croissant,
Ridiculous.
The French would go, sacre bleu.
And they use tons of butter.
Correct. And it's butter from the correct cow.
Right.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so hang on a second. So the Mesoamericans had figured out how to make the food non-toxic. We bring it into our Western European style diet, if we want to call it that.
Right.
And we bastardized it in the worst possible way to damage ourselves while filling our bellies and bloating them and making our joints hurt and shrinking our brains.
That's exactly right.
Wow. Okay. So one of the other, that's pretty mind-blowing when you think of it that way. One of the things that I'm curious about, though, is like the Indian subcontinent in particular and Southeast Asia, they have a lot of spicy foods. And one of the things I've been concerned about as I've been following the Plant Paradox now for over a year, kind of my own version of it. How do you make things spicy and hot, and why don't I get to, enjoy really hot foods?
Well, so the process of fermenting pepper sauce actually eats the lectins. So Tabasco sauce is fermented. Most traditional pepper sauces are
those
made
are okay
by fermentation, so they're perfectly safe. But what I learned in studying the culture of New Mexico, the New Mexican Indians, who were the original users of peppers, always charred the skin off the pepper and removed the seeds before it was ground into chili powder or eaten. That's why to this day there's still the Hatch chili pepper roast, right, where they take the skin off of the pepper because they've learned that the lectins are in the skin and the seeds, and they get rid of them. What's really interesting, the Italians also learned that peppers were so dangerous you had to peel and de-seed them. You will never buy a jar of Italian bell peppers in the glass jar in the grocery store and see peels and seeds because they've been removed. And an interesting, I think the funniest part of all this is the stuff that we throw on our pizza, the chili pepper flakes and seeds, were the discard of taking the harmful stuff off of the peppers before they ate them. And I think it's just incredibly hilarious that the stuff that we threw away because it was so harmful is the stuff we ladle on our pizza.
Going, yay, that's adding all this
flavor.
So
a pizza, if you think about it, is the perfect lectin bomb. It's got wheat lectins. Yep. It's got cheese from American cows, and even if it says mozzarella cheese, it's from an American cow. It's got tomato sauce, and I can tell you that the peels and seeds are in there. And then you put on the chili pepper flakes.
And make it all worse.
And you wonder why Larry the Cable Guy takes Prilosec OTC, or Tums, and so the pizza doesn't slap him in the face.
Right.
That heartburn is actually caused by lectins, and the plants are saying, "You stupid idiot! Why are you doing this? You see what happens when you eat my babies? I'm going to try to get your attention."
So speaking of eating my babies, one of the things that did surprise me in the Plant Paradox and in the Plant Paradox Cookbook, because seeds seem to be one of the key problems, right? I mean, where lectins...
Certain seeds.
That's the key. Right. So I was pleasantly surprised to see something like flax seeds are still good, because one of the big bombshells in the Plant Paradox is that a number of what are being touted as superfoods, and I still see it every day on Instagram, every day, all over social media from so-called health experts, eat these superfoods like... goji berries, for example, and it's loaded with lectins. But so other than just reading your list, is there like a rule of how to figure out which ones are loaded with lectins and which ones aren't?
So interestingly enough, the plants have strategies for protecting their babies. Now, certain babies, they actually want a predator to eat. So in general, the seeds in fruits are coated with, you can think of it as a thin candy shell that you cannot digest.
Right.
We cannot get through it. So the plant wants you to eat that seed so that you will go off a little in the distance and poop their babies with a generous dollop of fertilizer. On the other, so there, for instance, a flaxseed is totally indigestible by our
That's why we have to grind it.
Yeah, and it's so funny you see these flaxseed crackers that are solid flaxseed, and well, you can eat them, but you're not going to. Yeah, it's just going to go right on through. So sesame seeds are the same way. Poppy seeds are the same way. I used to think that chia seeds were the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I had them in my office. And one day I'm talking to Lauren Cordain, the professor from Colorado State, who is the father of the paleo diet, and I'm extolling to him the virtues of chia seeds.
As I used to before I met you too,
and
yes.
he told me, he said, you don't read the literature, do you? And I said, well, I do. And he said, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to send you, I'm going to email you 2 papers right now, and you'll never eat a chia seed again in your life. And what they found, it was actually a pretty interesting study. We know that chia seeds have short-chain omega-3 fats. Sounds like a good idea. So they designed a study to see if, in fact, eating chia seeds increased your omega-3 fat levels, your alpha-linoleic acid.
Right. Just because consuming something doesn't equal your body using it.
Right. Yeah. And so a good study. And they said, well, we know that omega-3 fats are anti-inflammatory. So as part of the study, we're going to measure C-reactive protein, a good basic measure. And lo and behold, they found that, in fact, eating chia seeds would increase short-chain omega-3 fats in the patients. But lo and behold, their C-reactive proteins went up.
So what does that mean, C-reactive protein?
That's inflammation.
Okay, got it. I just want to make sure that we all understand that that's what you mean. So now I have a massive inflammation reaction in my system.
Right, from eating chia seeds.
Which, by the way, since you're a heart surgeon, isn't inflammation a pretty big issue with our cardiovascular system?
Yeah. So our cardiovascular system, cholesterol is not the culprit that people think it is. Cholesterol is, my favorite expression, Michael DeBakey, one of the true fathers of heart surgery in Houston, Texas, used to say that cholesterol has nothing to do with heart disease, that it's an innocent bystander that gets caught up in an accident or inflammation on the wall of the blood vessel. And what I try to tell my patients is, let's suppose I'm an alien orbiting the Earth and sending back my observations to high command. And one of my reports could say, I've been watching things here in Los Angeles, and I can tell you, I'm pretty certain that ambulances cause car accidents, because every time I see a car accident, there's an ambulance. And so I'm pretty sure, take this down, that ambulances cause car accidents. Now, his report is, of course, an association between ambulances and car accidents, not a causation. And what DeBakey was trying to say, which I now agree with, is that cholesterol may be, in fact, an ambulance that's there at a site of inflammation, kind of patching things up, and gets caught in the process of the inflammation. So it's not the cholesterol that caused the problem. It's the inflammation that attracted the cholesterol to that area. So, Dr. Gundry, I know I have a limited time today with you, and I want to steer to something from lectins away, because inflammation, people talk about sugar being an inflammatory. Does that cause a C-reactive protein increase as well, the way that the chia seeds did? It works in a totally different mechanism. Okay. So sugar, what we consider sugar, is sucrose, which is half glucose and half fructose, and dextrose and fructose, sorry. And so what we now know about the sucrose that we eat, and also in high fructose corn syrups that's in everything, is fructose, and some of my critics get all hot and bothered about this, is a toxin. It is a known toxin. And it has been proven, there's a beautiful NIH paper that shows that fructose in and of itself is a major cause of inflammation in our liver, where C-reactive protein is produced. It's also a major toxin. About 30% of it gets loose and directly goes to the kidneys, where it is a direct renal toxin. And my critics ought to read the literature because it is a direct renal toxin.
Which I'm going to get to another question in a second. Why I get you see me like visibly get upset as you're explaining that is I understand why a lot of people choose, and I support people making choices in their lives and in their diets, and I absolutely mean that you have to figure out what works best for your body, but listen to your body. As we were talking about, like me with cashews, too many vegans that I know have way too much sugar, fructose, in their diet. And so you can be on a beautiful vegan diet that you're having way too much sugar on, and you can still have kidney failure because of it.
Correct.
It's pretty important. I want to point out something else, though. So you also, because we talk about lectins, and this is a product that I actually use as well. It's called Lectin Shield that you have formulated. I've taken glucosamine and other things, too, because that binds with the lectins in your blood.
Absolutely true.
But this one in particular, so I wear occasionally, I don't have one on right this minute, otherwise I'd be showing you a continuous glucose monitor, Dexcom G5, and I do experiments on myself. So I've found that I have some weird little things in my blood, how my body reacts, but something very specific to the Lectin Shield product. This is so I can have a piece of bread every now and then, because like your wife and in my religion and everywhere else, breaking bread means something.
Sure.
So without taking Lectin Shield, I had a piece of nice sourdough bread, right? Enjoyed it. And I watched my blood glucose go to 140. And the next day, same everything else. I had about the same starting number. I think I was right around 90, maybe 95. I took one Lectin Shield, probably 30 minutes before I had my piece of bread. Same loaf of bread, same size piece of bread. Now, I know this is not scientific because this isn't a one-off.
But you're an N of 1.
Right? N of 1. The only difference was taking the Lectin Shield, and my blood glucose only went to 120, not 140. Do you see a relationship there between, how my insulin is working in the presence of lectins?
Yeah. If you notice from the book, one of the things that lectins do, particularly the lectins in wheat, even if you use sourdough bread, is that they actually bind and block insulin receptors on muscles. And so you actually have more glucose that would normally get taken up in muscles. And I mean, I didn't make this up. It's actually well documented with studies on how these things work. They block insulin receptors. And if you can't take up glucose because the insulin receptor is blocked, you're stuck. Now, how do you visualize that? The way I visualize it is you've just landed after a long flight and you're pulling up to the gate and the pilot stops short of the gate and says, "Oh, folks, there's a plane still at the jetway and we have to wait for him to back out and, be patient because it's been a long flight. And as soon as he backs out, we'll leave." Lectins are insulin mimics. And what they do is normally a hormone binds to the jetway, releases its information, the passengers, and then backs off. What lectins do and other endocrine disruptors is they bind but don't let go. And so the other plane's always at the gate. So you can't get the passengers' glucose out of your bloodstream because the gate's blocked.
That's interesting. So that would explain, because I marveled. I went running to my wife. I'm like, you wouldn't believe what I just observed in myself, that taking the Lectin Shield actually kept me in a much tighter range, which is healthier. The tighter your blood glucose range, the lower chance of metabolic syndromes, et cetera. I mean, just so many different issues. My brain works better. My liver works better. Everything works better if I'm staying in that tighter blood glucose range.
Right. And we are desperately to maintain low blood sugar levels because glucose in and of itself is an arterial toxin.
Right. Yeah. And again, really, I mean, that's why up until recent times, like type 1 diabetes was a death sentence. And if you survived long, you had kidney failure, you had eye failure, you
got your legs cut off.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's dramatic. All right. Well, Now let's talk about what we have available today. It's the Plant Paradox is the book.
Yep.
But the new one that's out, this is the supplement. And again, if you don't want to read the whole Plant Paradox, you have a great summary at the beginning of the Plant Paradox Cookbook. This is an amazing, I mean, it changed my whole family's life in terms of how we function. And my body, I've told you this, I have 2 reconstructed shoulders. I have a bad back from being in a motorcycle accident. I got hit by a truck. I had chronic pain. Cutting out sugar helped reduce some of that. Cutting out the cashews and the peanuts helped some of that. But when we went low lectin in my house, I mean, I am almost completely, now I've added some yoga, some other moves to help. I don't have shoulder pain. I don't have back pain. This is really, it's been a significant impact on my life, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, it's great. And, you know, the reason the Plant Paradox was and still is a huge success, but people kept saying, okay, you got me. I understand this. I feel better, but, you know, give me something to eat. And
lots of good stuff to eat.
And, you know, coming out of the Midwest, I mean, there's even funnel cakes in there and waffles. In fact, I made funnel cakes on the home show last month.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, and everybody said, funnel cakes? You can have a funnel cake?
And people who follow me for any period of time is, almond flour, cassava flour, coconut flour. I use tiger nut, so I get a lot of fiber in there too. There are sugar alternatives. You and I are both big fans of the monk fruit. Yeah. I like the Lecanto brand for some things.
Very good. And there's a great Lecanto maple syrup that I give my granddaughter on her Plant Paradox waffles.
There you go. I mean, there are so many great options. You don't have, it's not limiting. No. It's just you have to change just a little bit your mindset, just a little bit. But the Plant Paradox Cookbook will help walk you there. Dr. Stephen Gundry, look, I always love seeing you. Thank you so much for coming in today.
It's great to see you again, Ethan.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Dr. Gundry.